My name is Thomas Kresge, and this evening I'm going to arrange a piece of music. And by piece of music, don't expect the whole thing. We only got 40 minutes. It's going to be more like 8 to 16 measures. But what I hope we will see here is a certain workflow of how I like to approach especially large ensemble arrangements. You open up your scoring software and you see 40 staves, and you don't know what to do. Hopefully this gives you an idea of how to get from an idea to actually orchestrating that out. I solicited suggestions so that this is somewhat, slightly, a little bit going into this blind. I'm not gonna do any transcribing live because that would waste all of our time. So whatever we go with, it's got to be something I can find on like VG lead sheets. So at least have a reference. Hopefully you didn't waste your vote, but yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Well, this is what it is. And I'm also gonna pick something that I know I can do a little bit easily in the time we have. Let's see what we got here. Just a moment. I have to make sure I pick something that I can do without going crazy in the time we have. Any more suggestions? If you more suggestions, like the hard stuff. That's a big pain in the butt. No, that's a pain in the butt.
Hornet from Holiday.
I'll find it. Don't worry, guys. The 10-minute piece of music, yeah.
Pokemon Red and Blue Silk Company. Pokemon Red and Blue the bus Clay Fighters.
Yeah, I stopped.
Sorry, it's taking me a minute. There is some calculating I have to do. You know what? Let's go with that. That is on VG lead sheets, and I can make it work. All right. So we're staring at a blank score, going, I don't even know what to do. How do I even do any of this? Who do I give what to? The answer is we don't give anything to anybody. So, I deeply believe that the best way to write music, at least in this kind of context, is to be starting on a few staves, 3 to 5, and building out just the music you want on those staves. Because in my mind, arranging and composing is a separate skill and a separate task than actually orchestrating music. You can have the same arrangement, but you can have endlessly different orchestrations for different ensembles, different groups, whatever. So that's kind of where we're going to start. There's going to be a lot of moments where I just have to think and do stuff, so you're welcome to just like shout out questions or something like that, because the first thing I will always be doing is just transcribing some music here. So again, what was just selected, one thing I was suggesting when I decided to go with was Cass's theme from Cass's final song from Breath of the Wild. So here we go.
What software is this?
This is Sibelius. That's a panel for next year.
No, but it's
If you want to know.
no, I mean like it's involved in the writing process.
Oh, I don't know. I don't usually write with them while it's there. Maybe sometimes it helps with noting, but.
So it looks like you go for melody line first versus bass line first?
So at the moment, I'm looking at a lead sheet and I'm just trying to get the notes in, and then we'll do some like actual arranging. I gotta transcribe something first.
Is the program preference just like a personal preference, or is
Yeah, so a little more about myself since I just kind of showed up and was like, hey guys, aren't I cool? I am a professional orchestrator and music copyist. I do work for like film scoring sessions and stuff like that. Typically my work involves some composer sending me like a MIDI file, and then I will, from there, have to basically make the sheet music for the musicians for the session. Within the world of like VGM and stuff, I manage and do a lot of arranging for a band called the Game Brass. Yeah, Game Brass. And I don't need more than 32 bars because we're not going to get that far.
what is the difference between arranging and orchestrating?
Good question. So, arranging, the reason I like to compartmentalize and separate these things is because they involve different choices and tasks. You can have one composition or one arrangement even, and reorchestrate that in any number of ways and ensembles. So I'm going to be starting on these sketch staves, I use the words interchangeably. These three sketch staves to kind of demonstrate this, that we will have an arrangement from there, and then I will have to move it across all the other 30 staves or whatever of the orchestra. Because we're just going to see like different notes and chords and textures throughout this, but those could be then given to any group. Now, of course, I have to think about the group I have. I can't just necessarily write whatever. But one example is I have arrangements I've done for. I have an arrangement I did for orchestra once, and I gave it to the Game Brass. I had to change it up, but I still just did that by going back to the sketch I had and then editing things down so that what was once intended for, multiple sections of instruments could work for 5 brass players, for example. Composing involves, to me, coming up with a melody, coming up with harmonies and voicings for those harmonies, coming up with textures underneath all of that, and orchestrating is finally deciding how you actually make that work with the musicians you have.
How do you determine what the song is in?
Well, right now I'm looking at a lead sheet. So I'm just copying what's there from the original. I will often change the key if it's just going to fit the group better. I probably missed a measure somewhere, but it doesn't matter much. So this piece is in A minor, which is going to be just fine. This is not going to be complicated for most ensembles. And this is what we first have, is just notes and chord symbols. So I'm going to break the step-by-step process that I was forced to do when I was in graduate school was to write out a melody, write out chord changes, and then actually voice those chords. Now, in practice, I'm not always following it so rigidly these days, but it's still useful, I think, to think of it in this order, especially if you don't know what to do, which is one of the more common issues. Someone just looking at the score and being like, I don't know what to write anymore. So here's what I mean by that. I know what my chord is, and how do I want to realize that chord? That's what a voicing is the actual notes we go with. So I'll figure something out. Well, it depends on what the song is. This piece is in 3/4, so that's where That's where we're at. I mean, I guess, so one of the things is I've got 40 minutes to do this. So I have to be kind of like conservative with some of my choices to get it something that's not just like 4 notes before you guys, before this live studio audience. So in theory, if I wanted to be more, creative's not the right word, but just more transformative, you could do that. I could think, what if I want this theme to be in 3/4/4 or something like that. For our sake, and what I think most people start with anyway, is trying to do a relatively faithful adaptation of the original, keeping the chord progression probably mostly the same, similar-ish textures. And when I say texture, we'll get to that in a bit, I guess. Okay, so the steps you would have just seen. I got some notes down in front of me. I voiced out these chords. So these are like the notes we're gonna see, perhaps. This might change later, but this is where we'll start. Let's see. We have sound.
I'm actually using a lot of like hotkeys for convenience sake right now, but if you have like more robust like equipment station at home.
One second, I need to fix my sound issues. I'm not getting sound developed. One of my fellow MAGFest staff members, is the sound up? Mixer up? I'm plugged in, just, you know what, it might not be you guys, hold on. Oh, it was my fault the whole time. Yep, okay. Sorry to bother you, go back to your dinner. Okay. Honestly, my setup at home is not much different. I just need a keypad and a mouse. I mean, I got an extra monitor, but I actually have that here too, so never mind. When it comes to writing, it's basically the same, except that I guess I have a keyboard and a piano, but I don't really use that much, to be honest, personally. Okay. Oh my god, it's so slow. Yeah, tempo mark. Okay. All right. So first things, just really basic laid out form is where we're starting here. What I should be describing this as. What's the right note there? My ears don't work. C. It repeats itself. Okay, thank you. Be louder. I can't hear anybody up here. We'll be lucky if we get to the B section. Okay. So, whether or not I'm being faithful to the original or doing something more transformative, I tend to start with a form, a structure. Like, where are we going to go? Am I going to repeat the A section this many times? Whatever. And so I might just have the melody even just like copy pasted throughout this to where I roughly want these sections. I want to think of the bigger picture, so I know this section needs to be quieter, this section needs to be louder. So at least when I'm writing, I'm thinking ahead to what else might be happening, or I take the right approach. Now, and it might not be all linear. Maybe I first arrange the biggest section or something like that, but I'm generally starting with a form, some kind of structure, to also just to know how long the whole thing's going to be. And that's kind of what we have here. We have well, we don't really have the full structure because I'm not going to go that far, but we do at least have this section, some chords that'll work, but it's not very interesting. It's just big, long notes. So we're going to make it more interesting. So, from a voicing, we need some kind of motion. We need a texture, is how I would describe it. And my approach to this is once you have those notes, we just use the same notes to turn it into something else. We have this set of 4 or 5 notes, and the texture is just the time we choose to play them, the rhythm behind it. So we're gonna go with something pretty straightforward here, and do just this 1, 2, 3 thing. Maybe I'll change it later if I get so inspired. And again, feel free to just be like, hey, I have a question, dude.
Where are your 2 treble classes in the
What's that?
Why are there 2 treble classes in the section?
So this is like my scoring template, which is, the full orchestra and some other staves we'll get to in a bit. But at the bottom is just like the sketch. Again, this is like the full reduction of what will eventually be an orchestrated piece of music. And it's just kind of what I have by default is 3 staves. There's no reason I have this up here as opposed to below, except that usually I just place the melody on top and everything else underneath. At the moment, everything's just down here. That's just my personal workflow.
What was the hockey you used to chop the bottom note off?
I'm using filters within Sibelius, so filtering out the bottom note of each chord and then copying everything over. Okay, so now we've turned this into some kind of texture, but I want to be, again, I'm going to be a little bit more interesting here, and change it up halfway through.
Are those piano sounds you're getting built into Sibelius, or are you pulling that other sounds?
It's called Note Performer, which is specifically adapted for notation software. Okay, so
Where did you say you get your lead sheets from?
VG lead sheets, the premier location for all of your crowdsourced VGM lead sheets.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah, that was what I was going to ask. So you do kind of middle voices and
So don't overthink the way I have these sketch staves sorted out. They're just, this is like, if you have a piano reduction, I should call it, I don't even like to call it piano reduction. A reduction of the score is just going to take every note and put it on fewer staves. Because in reality, an orchestra might have, 1,000 musicians, but there's really only, 2 to 4 parts independently going on at a time. It's some combination of doubling. Maybe one of the parts is harmonized out. So like in this case, if I go back to the beginning, at the moment, I would say I have 3 parts going on. We have the melody, we have a bass line here, and then we've got this like the chuck, half of the boom chuck throughout this. And then that gets orchestrated out. So big reason to follow this workflow is to not get overwhelmed with all the different parts. We just see the few parts we'll actually be writing, and then that gets blown up in a systematic way. Another big reason to write this way, and so how I got here, back when I was a young college child, I just wrote straight to the score. And that's how I did everything all through undergraduate. And my teacher once was like, well, maybe you should try to do a piano reduction first. And I was like, okay. And did it for 5 minutes, and then was like, no, it's not for me. Then I got to graduate school and was actually forced to follow this process. We had to present just the sketch first, and then that would get approved, and then I would go on to the next steps. And so when I was actually forced to do it a certain way and had to go through and it was not just suggested casually to do it, but given a process, it became a lot more obvious why this is helpful. And it compartmentalized some of the parts of the process, so it's not just here's everything all at once. it lets me just see everything. Obviously, this is way easier to see what's going on than all of this all at once, right? So I can actually look at my music and be like, oh, okay, this is what chord notes are going on. The step that's about to come up, one of the important things is that I can't, is to avoid deviating from what I have in the sketch pretty much at all. Not saying I would never do that, but the whole point of this is I see what the music's gonna be like in terms of how low we are, the voice meter like, and then I'm not then just adding random notes once I'm orchestrating. All my notes are right here to work with.
Can you play what you have so far?
Of course. Yes, yeah, I will play now. And I'm only adding in these dynamics for the sake of playback. They're not actually like relevant to the final product yet. Okay, good enough for now. Can always make changes later. So, I'm just going to say that this is my reduction. This is what we got. I'm sketched out, just to make this a little visually easier, I'm going to move this up. And there's no reason this is a clarinet sound. It's not because I'm going to put this on clarinet. It's just the most neutral sound in my ears when I'm sketching things out. That's not also just a piano sound. So, nothing to read in there. This is just a reduction of the notes we will use. So, zooming out a little bit, I got more staves. Not yet going to everybody. What I call pre-orchestrating, which is mostly just who in general is going to play this. Is it strings? Is it brass? Is it woodwinds? That's all I want to think about for now. So now I actually need to think about that.
As you compose this, what kind of tone is it you try to go
Well, for the purposes of this panel, I'm just trying to get something done. But, so, like, yeah, if, I don't want to delete that. If I, yeah, I guess that's the best way I can answer. If it's a different piece, then maybe I'll go somewhere else. I mean, generally, when I arrange stuff, I don't, for orchestra, I try to, what I like to do, or what I like the end result to be, is something that I think of as being in the spirit of the original, while still being worthwhile in its own right. At least when I'm, say, arranging for game brass, I'm not usually trying to take a totally new approach to the music, which is fine if you do. And when I am usually trying to transform things more, it's usually because I'm writing something for a specific other type of a group, like a big band or something like that. So there's more adaptation going on. So in the spirit of the original, while still feeling like it actually has a reason to exist. There's actually certain pieces I have chosen not to arrange because I don't think I can do anything with them that wouldn't make me want to listen to my version over the original. Usually stuff that's already orchestral, honestly. Okay, so here's the simplest way I could do this is think, well, let's just give all this material to the strings. Sure. That works. We got 5 parts I could give this to. Only 4 notes right there right now, though. So at this point, I now need to actually think of the ensemble, how many notes. And there's going to be probably some back and forth between like pre-orchestrating it and going back to the sketch, as I'm like, well, okay, I only wrote 3 notes, but actually we're going to have a full orchestra. I want to fill this out more. Well, let's say we do something like this. Okay, so now real fun of orchestrating is finding other ways to kind of color what's already there. Again, I'm not going to add any notes that aren't already down here in the sketch. Effectively, it's like a copy and paste job now to some extent. But it doesn't have to be just that. As long as I'm keeping the notes and I'm paying attention to what's going on between everything, I can still do some, come up with some interesting ways to color this and orchestrate it. So, let's say that stays what it is, but then like up, not the brass hit. So I'm thinking of some ways to layer on what's already there. Again, it's all just the same notes. Yeah, we'll start there. Okay, so I've pre-orchestrated something. I thought I want woodwinds on this, specifically the melody. I'm thinking of some sounds, like this is low enough where it's only going to be playable on certain instruments. Let's see what we go with now. And then, so the pre-orchestration staves are like more just a convenience between the two steps. This is actually not a step I was forced to do in graduate school. We could just go straight from the sketch to everybody. But I just think it's way easier to see things condensed and then go out. So maybe I'll make myself a note like this and say, okay, this will go to those guys. And then I'll remember later. But not oboe, it's a little too low for oboe, so I'm changing to English one. Was a question about hotkeys? Oh wait, it was about setup. Yeah, so learn your hotkeys in your software, guys. I hope this is a demonstration of the usefulness of that and learning shortcuts and what it can do. This isn't meant to explain how the notation software works, but at least you'll see a lot of what I go into. This is like just a filter, so I can say, please pick the second note in every measure and pick the bottom note of it, and then I can just cut that out right away. Sibelius has these. Dorico has a decent amount of filters. I'm sorry if you use MuseScore, it kind of lacks some of these power features.
Have you ever done an orchestration that, for an orchestra that had an instrument or instruments that you're really not very familiar with?
So I don't mean this in a, there's no way to say this not arrogantly. There's not a lot of instruments I'm not familiar with, but there are some I'm not. So in that case, I'm just like asking, it's just research at that point. Like if someone's, I don't know, someone's like, we have a shakuhachi. I don't know, I've never worked with that before. So yeah, I gotta just research it. What's the last time this would have happened? I have a friend who has a theremin, so that came up a few times, and figuring that out. I think one of the bigger ones I had to like really learn about was steel drums. I did a steel drum arrangement at one point, and I like asked the guy, "Can you tell me some things about drums?" And he was like, "Oh, you're trying to write for drums and you don't know about it?" And I was like, "Well, yeah," but it's just research at that point. If I gave an earlier panel just a few hours ago that was actually about like orchestrating in general.
Have you done orchestration for like choral work?
Not as much for choral, for voices. That's just an area that I haven't done as much. So, and they do have their own whole world of things to kind of be aware of. All right. That'll do. That took me a lot longer than it should because I was answering questions and thinking, but here's what we got so far. So, I hope the main point you see here is mostly the process. Okay? Figured out kind of what I want down here. Figured out generally where I wanted that to be in terms of the orchestra, and then actually orchestrated it out. And at that point, I mean, the advantages of this, besides just like seeing the music more clearly and being able to write a little more cleanly, is also just I feel like it will speed you up because I really was just starting to kind of copy and paste stuff once I knew where I kind of wanted things. Probably all aching to hear it though. So. Being so badly balanced on this.
Wait, so is the idea that like for some of those chords you had at the bottom, you're like breaking it up and then giving them individual sections?
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly it. We just start from the sketch. I kind of figure out the chords I want, the notes we're going to use, and then move that around. I'll kind of show another example of that in a bit. Let's hear that again. Maybe it won't sound so bad. Playback coming through these speakers is pretty awful. All right, and there you have something that sounds like the song, and it's an orchestra. In however many steps that was. We got more going on, so process would just keep repeating from there. It's kind of it. Okay. So to show that again, I'm going to look at this next section. Again, I just transcribed the melody out. And I'm just working from a lead sheet here. Like I know I've heard the piece of music, so I know like how it sounds. But I actually kind of like working from a lead sheet because it at least gets me out of just thinking about exactly what the original did. I do like to transcribe the originals pretty thoroughly, just like as an academic exercise. But when actually arranging, I just like the more simple reference. Okay, so the process boiled down, and as you get more fluent and comfortable with arranging, you can kind of, I don't want to say skip steps, but like kind of do multiple steps at once. So I've got my melody. Without that, it might as well be a different song. And a voicing for the chords. So, like, what are the actual notes I'm going to use for this? I want to be a little more interesting and maybe not just write notes beneath what's going on, but get above it. This is in bass clef still. Sorry.
Earlier you mentioned friendly keys. I'm familiar with an ensemble friendly keys. What about four?
As a general rule, wind ensemble usually kind of trends towards flat keys, like F and B flat, and E flat. Orchestras tend to trend towards sharp keys, like G, D, and that's more because those tend to. So it's not. So I shouldn't say just orchestra versus wind band. String instruments, sharp keys tend to be easier, just by the design of the instrument and also often just what is taught. I greatly encourage people to change the key of their music. If it's in a bad key, this piece of music is not in a bad key, but it could potentially be depending on how certain instruments transpose. now. So, voiced out some chords. I want to make it not just block chords. So, I will think of a texture. And a texture, to define that in this context, is placing some kind of motion or rhythm to the actual chord. That could mean I just actually play the whole chord in some kind of way like this, or we actually break it up in some way. Oh my gosh. The one thing that is different is my muscle memory is adapted to a different keyboard. So all these random mistakes or me like jumping around is because I pressed a button that was slightly closer or whatever. Anyway. So, these are both the same voicing, but it's just played differently. And when I say it's the same voicing, it's the same notes. Could be that. I don't know, maybe you want to go wild and do something like this. No, I don't like that. But this could maybe work. So that could be interesting. The ones that... So, as far as I'm concerned, key signatures, keys are just a practical issue. Like, some people will be like, I don't know, F sharp feels magical to me, and D feels sad. Like, I think that's horseshit. Like, if you believe that, I'm sorry, but it's just purely like practical what key it's in. Like, so, and those practical situations can expand to other things. Like, singers genuinely will have certain notes that resonate better. So yeah, you could say that being in a certain key for that singer will help certain things. But that's still, to me, like a practical consideration in terms of the tone you get. There's not, I know my keys pretty well. I don't mind working in anything, but like, I would avoid keeping the music in something like F sharp major or B major or whatever, G flat, maybe D flat. D flat's not as uncommon in my opinion, but as a practical consideration, like orchestral instruments aren't really designed for those keys. Like they're optimized for C major basically, or whatever they transpose to. And all those other notes are like on weird, like side keys and stuff. I'm just like clicking around because I'm trying to talk. So I want to point out what I did here. If you're like, why did he just do random notes suddenly different? And it's because I didn't want things to like collide unpleasantly with the melody. If I just went with the F here or the A, it's gonna kind of introduce some like muddiness, which could be an issue if this melody's not on an instrument that's gonna pierce through really well. Sort of. I mean, I know what it will not work in. And so I'm thinking, well, it's gonna have to be either some kind of string or some kind of woodwind or some kind of something that's gonna work. Probably woodwind is what I thought of. So yeah, we're still kind of thinking of where it's gonna go, but I'm not starting. The point isn't that I'm not thinking about how things are gonna be played or what instrument's gonna be on something, as much as I'm just not starting on giving them the notes right away. Because there's a lot more to consider, and it's mostly just about these details, like that little potential collision that isn't like the end of the world, but all those little details add up. An arrangement's a series of literally hundreds or thousands of decisions, so all those like little messinesses can add up and just create a weaker arrangement overall. All right. So there we have like a new textural idea. I didn't want that. I don't know, it's fine. We'll make it work. So, this is my reduction now. Every note you see here is what's going to be up in the rest of the orchestra. How am I doing on time? Do I need to like wrap up? Okay. We'll try to be, I'm going to be fast here. Alright, so Zast, am I thinking something? Sure. This will be some kind of woodwind. Be some kind of brass. Percussion's kind of gotten left out right now, sorry. But yeah, so I mean, percussion, a point I made in my earlier panel was that they're like seasoning on top of your arrangement. They're there to make it more interesting or add emphasis or a little more drive or whatever. So yeah, not always, not thinking about it, but not necessarily writing it right from the start. How about this line? So I do need to think about how people are going to play this. How are instruments going to play this? How's it going to be heard? It's kind of not going to be heard on flute, but that's okay for now.
If you were writing a flute two part and you were taking that line, how would that change?
Well, here's what we're going to do.
Alright.
So that's a whole nother panel. One I might give. Like, obviously I'm moving through each step fast. I know harmony, I know music theory, I know how to voice chords out, and I've figured some things out. So like, in this case, learn about voicings and chord voicings. Like, this is a topic that I think actually a lot of people go through all of undergraduate or music school and like don't ever really learn about unless you're a jazz major. But voicing is just how the chord is like realized in terms of what notes you pick. And there's a bunch of different methods you can look up on voicing chords and on voicing chords and the space you might choose between them. Okay. Alright, there's something that might work. They're gonna kick me out, drag me out soon, so. Why can't I click this? Alright, so, very simple. Let's say, also, I'm looking at this, I'm like, what if I want this melody doubled or something? Maybe down an octave with our horn players? There's a lot of details that I'm not talking about, like how to actually orchestrate. This is the main takeaway I hope we get is just the workflow process here. But if I want to make a decision that's like going to change notes, then I definitely want to look back at my sketch and make sure it's not going to be weird. And on a quick look, I don't think it will be.
Hey, Thomas.
Yes.
1 minute if you want to close out.
Yes. So I'm going to play this, and then we will be done. All right. So there's the 4 bars I managed to get out. as well as the 8 bars at the start. All right, this was admittedly a harder piece to immediately think of something, but thank you. Thank you.